going on, everybody? It's Nick here with you. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to this special rock movie review for the brand new Beach Boys documentary, which dropped on Disney Plus a couple of weeks back. And for this rock movie review, I'm once again joined by a special guest, Mr. Ryan Charkow, who's a good friend of mine to talk about the Beach Boys movie. We talked a couple weeks ago here on the channel about the Beatles Let It Be movie. Ryan is a huge music fan, Beatles fan, and also Beach Boys fan. So welcome back to the channel, Ryan.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking about this film and the band in general, or the Beach Boys, not the band, but the band, the Beach Boys.
Yeah, so this is a new documentary that came out on Disney Plus a couple of weeks ago, produced by Frank Marshall, who's a very famous Hollywood producer who's done Indiana Jones and Jurassic Park and lots of movies over the years. And he put together this Beach Boys documentary, which covers their entire career in a little bit of I guess, a compressed kind of format than what we're used to with some other band documentaries that we've seen in the past. But Ryan, let's just give our general thoughts on this Beach Boys documentary. For me, I really did enjoy this documentary for the most part. I felt that it was a decent representation of the Beach Boys career, like I was saying, kind of in a nutshell in a compressed format. There really was a lot missing in terms of the Beach Boys career. It's very much front loaded on their early years, on the 60s, from the early 60s up until the late 60s, kind of the glory years of the Beach Boys when they were making that surf rock magic up until the release of Pet Sounds. And then things kind of tended to fall apart a little bit after Pet Sounds. And the thing about this movie is that it's hard to see where the point of view is coming from, because the Beach Boys have had a lot of drama in their career over the years. Obviously, there's a couple of different members that aren't around to talk about the band's career, like Dennis Wilson, of course, Carl Wilson, of course, are no longer with us to talk about it. Brian Wilson has recently been diagnosed with dementia, so he's been going through a lot, and we hope he's doing well. But he's not really able to offer anything current with this documentary. So then you're left with people like Mike Love and Al Jardine and Bruce Johnson, of course, who are obviously key members of the Beach Boys. But it doesn't quite feel like the complete story of the Beach Boys that we were maybe hoping for. I was thinking about, obviously we're both huge Beatles fans, and thinking about the Beatles anthology, which is such a thorough telling of the Beatles story. And they were only really a recording band for 8 years. The Beach Boys were a recording band for what? 30 plus years, and it's very much compressed into this 2-hour movie. So I enjoyed it, but I felt like it was maybe a little bit too compressed, and would have liked to seen it elongated a little bit and turned into a longer documentary that really dug into those years in the 70s, and yes, maybe even the 80s, as bad as it was in the 80s, to get into some of those records as well. And then I was also kind of disappointed they didn't really talk about their album That's Why God Made the Radio, that came out in 2012, which was their big reunion record that they put out in 2012, which is an album that I really loved, and I would have liked to see them talk a little bit more about that. But those are kind of my main thoughts about this Beach Boys documentary. What are your kind of overall thoughts about what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, when I heard about the project, I guess it was a couple of years ago now. I think the Beach Boys signed with a new management group. I think that was it's run by Irving Azoff, who was I think that's his name. He managed the Eagles and then started a successful like music management company. And I know they signed off a lot of their branding to that company. So when this was announced, I was expecting a lot, because they kind of made it seem like this would be the big definitive career retrospective. I figured because it was going to be on a streaming platform, they're not hamstrung by time limits. It's not on television. It's not going to be in a theater, even though they did like a small theatrical, I guess just like a premiere or something like that. But it's not like restricted on time. So for me, if you've got Disney Plus, you don't need to do like 6 hours like they did with Get Back. But for me, I think at least 2 hours, like two parts, 2 hours each, would have been perfect, because I think this did an okay job giving the story, especially of their early years up until 1964. That was, I think, covered well. And then they just started speeding through things. And even Pet
Yeah.
Sounds they sped through, and they sped through
Right.
Smile. And then it was just like, and then the rest. And then
Yeah,
Endless
they just
Summer
like
came
splashed
out.
all the albums,
They
kind of like,
not
and
even
then
all
this
of them.
one and
Like,
this one and this one.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I so in 1998 they put out a movie with that the Beach Boys produced with a production company called Endless Harmony. I I don't know if you've seen it. I think we may have watched it once or twice
Yeah, maybe
together, but
back
I'm
in the
not
day.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and it's about an hour and 40 minutes, and they packed more information into that than they did here. And so I was expecting, just because of, modern capabilities and the fact that they're not, constrained to time, that they would be building off of that. And I found myself as I was watching this thinking, well, they did that better in the last one, or they touched on this better in the last one, or they interviewed better people in the last one, or they got better clips. And actually, some of the clips, or some of the interviews that they use in this are from that. Like there's a number of interviews with Brian where he's in a Hawaiian shirt at a piano.
Yeah.
That's from that movie. There's a couple of Mike Love clips where he's sitting. Um, I mean, he's sitting in a chair with a hat on all the time, but he's sitting like in a different environment, and he's like 20 or 25 years younger or whatever.
Yeah.
That's also from that. I don't think they used any. Oh, and a lot of the Carl clips that look like are towards the end of his life were also from that movie, or at least interviews done around that time. So I thought they were going to build off of that, and there was a lot that they recorded for that they include in that movie, like with Brian, showing how a lot of the songs were recorded, showing how the harmonies were put
Mhm.
together, showing the instrumentation. I think the interviews. So start with some of the good parts of this. I think the interviews, the contemporary interviews that they got, the new ones are fine. I think Mike Love is Mike Love, like, but I think he told his story, and that's fine. And I think those were good. I think Al was very good in this.
Yes, he was.
He's always comes across as a very like emotional person. I think he's just a sweet guy. I don't think there's anything you could say bad about him. And then David is fine, comes across well also for the kind of limited amount he's in it.
Yeah.
Um, I was a little put off that they included that very short um, clip of Brian. I understand you want to show him now, but I almost didn't think that was necessary if you're only going to show him for what he says, two or three lines as like in the present time, and then
Yeah,
that's it. And
and then they're on the
I
beach there
didn't.
at the end when they meet together at the. I guess
uh,
is that the at the end where they is that where they shot one of the album covers? I want to say it's like Surf and Safari or
yeah,
something. Yeah.
yeah, it was the first album cover, and they got shots for Surfer Girl on that shoot as well. I didn't like that end at all. We can go into that later, but
Yeah.
I just think I don't know like how much Brian was aware of what was happening, or I don't know his level of illness, so I can't
Mhm.
like comment on that. To me, it just seemed a little, I don't know, maybe distasteful is a bit strong, but it just didn't rub me the right way.
Mhm.
Um, and the yeah, I don't want to like unload here, but I just
Just
think
let it
that
all go. Let it all
they
go.
they didn't they didn't they didn't do them. I thought they would do the story right, and I felt that they didn't.
Mhm.
And maybe it's Disney. I don't know. Maybe this isn't the right platform. There's been a number of music documentaries that have come out that are kind of in longer form. I
Mhm.
just watched one not too long ago on HBO about Paul Simon, and that was two parts, about 2 hours
Right.
each. And like he's not somebody that I'm super into, but it was really well done, and it goes
Mhm.
into his and obviously his faculties are there, and maybe it's a different thing, but I think maybe HBO gives storytellers a better platform to tell their stories in a more warts and all way, whereas
Yeah.
Disney, might want to put that Disney shine on things.
Mhm.
I don't know what their level of involvement was. Um, yeah, I think it was. I was looking forward to it, and I was quite disappointed, and we can go into reasons why. But I don't know, like, yeah, I think also the interview subject that they selected outside of
Yeah.
of the band, and it
Yeah.
was good to hear from Marilyn.
That was
That
good. Yeah.
was very good because she was not in Endless Harmony. They
Mhm.
really didn't even mention her there. But the non like the fans, or the, I guess, I don't know, third
There was a couple
party
of
commenters.
music journalist kind of characters in there, guys that
Yeah,
were
well, you
talking
had that
about.
academic guy who
Mhm.
was terrible. I'm not
Well,
gonna,
just
to me,
wondering why he's in there. Yeah.
he basically was like, his first line is like basically like, I didn't like it. I didn't buy into the California dream, which is another thing they kept repeating through the
Mhm.
film, which is fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, him I didn't care for, and that kind of set the tone for me a little bit for
Mhm.
um third party or
Well,
non-band
yeah,
involvement.
that producer was it Don Was was in there. He's like a big record producer, produced a lot of stuff.
He's
I was kind
always
of
in
one,
these
yeah.
things. He's
Janelle Monae.
everywhere.
Why is
I
Janelle
didn't
Monae in
understand
there?
that.
I understand her
Ryan,
influence, but you know,
sure, that's awesome. But I,
yeah.
like Ryan Tedder, who one
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that
the One
that threw
Republic
me.
guy.
That
Yeah.
threw me.
And then
And
he made a
also,
critical error. The Ryan Tedder guy said, "Well, the Beatles quit touring because they couldn't pull it off live." No, no, they not really.
yeah,
You know, like
no,
that's
that's
not
absolutely not
really
true.
why they didn't
No, they were
stop
tired
touring.
and they got tired of people like, throwing garbage at them and, being accosted
The death threats and
in the Philippines and other, dictatorships and stuff like that. So yeah, but again,
yeah.
who like I know who that band is.
Hmm.
What do they have to do with the Beach Boys? Now, comparing that, it was nice to hear from Lindsey Buckingham because he's like a
That was cool.
contemporary, but also somebody who was obviously a fan growing up.
Hmm.
Um, in the other movie, they had Elvis Costello, Jackson Brown, Glenn Fry, Glenn Campbell,
Hmm.
Sean Lennon, a young Sean Lennon at like 23 years old, something like that.
Yeah,
I don't think you necessarily need to repeat them, but let's get some people that seem a little more into the Beach Boys. Like
yeah.
I didn't get the sense that any of them were really like maybe Janelle Monae seemed to come across a little sincerely, but
Hmm.
the others, it just seemed like I don't know. I
Yeah,
didn't understand their involvement.
yeah. We were saying where was Stamos? Where was John Stamos during this whole
Where was
thing?
John Stamos? But that's touching on like he's in Endless Harmony too for a short amount of time,
Yeah.
but he's there. You ignore a lot, yeah, ignoring the latter part of their career, and you don't need to even necessarily like go into the 80s or like whatever,
Mhm.
but they ignored like I think a key part of their career where they leave Capitol Records or they're basically shown the door and then they move on to Warner Music, who lets them
Yeah.
operate their own imprint. And they touch on that in Endless Harmony. I
Mhm.
don't mean to keep going back to that, but that's an important part. They touch on Sunflower and they touch on
Those
Surfs
big
Up.
albums, yeah.
You can maybe ignore if you want to leave out Holland and maybe some others, fine.
Yeah,
But
but then they
then
get into the Blondie when they talk about Blondie and
he's
Ricky
there for eight
Vicari.
seconds.
Yeah, I know that's really
Yeah,
quick. Yeah,
and they don't even play Sail on Sailor, which
yeah,
is
that's a
like
shame.
that's kind of why he was there. Not why, but
Yeah,
that's his big
that's a signature
moment with
song.
them, right?
Yeah.
And that's all over those tours that they were showing clips from from the from around Endless Summer. He
Mhm.
was, I believe they were on that tour. If not, they were on the one before that. But it just to me was like um yeah, like it's just kind of left me wanting more. They don't go into Beach Boys Love You, which again maybe I'm
That's
nitpicking, but
yeah,
in Endless Harmony Brian makes a point of saying I came back to make this record with the guys.
right.
It's my favorite Beach Boys record. Well, to me, if I'm a producer and I'm making this film, that's a pretty known, I think that's a known statement if within Beach Boys like fandom.
Yeah.
I would have included something on that. And that goes to what I was thinking when I was kind of rewatching bits of it last night. I didn't learn really anything here. I didn't
Mhm.
expect to, but for somebody that maybe is not familiar with them, I don't think this does them a service because it's kind of telling you a lot of the stuff that you probably are aware of anecdotally. Like it hits the
Right.
main beats.
Brian Wilson being in bed and all that, the Bare Naked
Yeah,
Ladies
Pet
song. It does.
Sounds.
It's
Yeah,
nothing that
Pet
hasn't already
Sounds.
been covered in a Bare Naked Ladies song. That's pretty
Yeah,
much
or yeah,
that's
if
just,
you know Brian Wilson, you know that, or if you know the Beach Boys, you know they didn't
mhm.
surf. You know, like that. That's very
Yeah.
like top level stuff. And I don't. Yeah, so I don't think it offers you know hardcore fans or existing fans very much, and I
Mhm.
don't think it does a service to people who maybe are looking to get into this band because if you think they're all about surf and safari and fun, 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 this doesn't do much to sway you off of that. Even
Right.
the part about Pet Sounds,
Yeah, well, they're
like
talking about how
they don't.
it was a failure when it first came out, and then it had a little bit of a second wind when it came out in the UK, and they do
Yeah.
talk about its cultural significance and its musical
Yes.
significance, and they talk about the back and forth with them and the Beatles and how that all happened there, and that influencing each other's records. That was cool, but again, still kind of glossed over when you really could have dug deep into this classic record.
Yeah. And talking about the Beatles, I thought there was way too much Beatles, and I'm obviously one of the
No,
biggest
so
Beatles
you're
fans.
saying
There
there's too
was too
much Beatles? What is
much.
that about? Yeah.
Too much. Like it was like significant. Whereas again, in the other one, they mention it, and it's very important to mention it because,
Mhm.
yeah, when obviously they interrupted their course of success, and then obviously later on, he was very, Brian was influenced to make things like Pet Sounds or Beach Boys today from listening to their records, but to make it seem like it seemed out of place to me. Like,
Yeah.
you're playing they played a like Beatles songs, which is fine. Like, I don't know, it just seemed to spend that much time on that seemed, if you're only gonna have like an hour and 50 odd minutes, to spend that
Mhm.
much time on the Beatles seemed unnecessary. There was a lot of unnecessary. The Charles Manson was
Oh, I
totally
like how they included
unnecessary.
that. Well, that is,
Well, yes.
I was surprised they actually included that because that is like, I do think that is maybe not so much now, but years ago that didn't seem to be like a well-known thing about how they were well acquainted with Manson and how they recorded one of his songs, and Dennis was sleeping with the Manson family women and stuff like that. Like they didn't quite get into all the nitty-gritty of it, but there was quite a
No.
lot there with Terry Melcher, and then you don't want to turn it into a Manson documentary, but then
Well,
I
that's the
did like how they
thing.
included it, but again, wasn't very deep into that topic.
And I don't like the way they framed it, because you had Mike Love leading the conversation, who
Mhm.
did not was not a big fan of Dennis, because didn't like the fact that Dennis got all the women and he was balding at 21 years old.
Yeah.
So I don't think he ever liked Dennis. He always saw him as a bit as like a drunk and a drug addict.
Yeah.
I think that's well known, and I think and I don't know why that was in there. And you had him saying, "Well, I only met him one guy at one time, and I could tell, oh, this wasn't, not my
Yeah.
cup of tea or whatever." I'm like, so the way
You
he
weren't
frames
cool
it
enough
to
to hang out with
me,
Manson.
yeah, yeah, the way he framed it irked me a little bit, because I'm like, why are you including this? It's not it's an offshoot. Yes, he
Mhm.
brought the song to the band, and you can mention that, that's fine. Um, but he made it seem like almost the whole murder, the Sharon Tate murder, he kind of laid it at Dennis's feet a little bit, like that.
Yeah.
Dennis introduced him to Terry Melcher, and that was Terry Melcher's house until he moved. And
Yeah.
so I don't think that's exact. Maybe I'm reaching a little bit, but it's hard not to think those things when what Mike Love is like. And again, he focuses on this loss. Like, it's a lot of him, I think, trying to rehab some stories that don't really work. Like, and then he gets into, when talking about Pet Sounds, well, that was a little bit blah blah blah, and then Smile, and then, like, luckily I came to the rescue to help with Good Vibrations. I'm like,
Yeah,
and they don't
exactly.
even tell the story of, there's a beautiful story that Brian tells in Endless Harmony about Good Vibrations and how he got the idea for it. And it was from his mother saying that dogs can tell people's mood by the vibrations they can feel the vibrations of somebody's voice and how they're talking through their
Yeah.
feet or something like that, or their paws, whatever. And again, like, that clip is available. And if you assume that most people haven't seen that movie, which they probably haven't, include that.
Yeah.
There's some really good clips that they have in that documentary with Terry Melcher, who's, again, a very obviously passed on a number of
Mhm.
years ago. Um, he colors Brian's production skills very well. He tells a story about, because they go into Phil Spector here, and I
Yeah.
think the key thing, and I can't recall if they touched on it, but I don't believe they did. The key thing about Phil Spector versus Brian Wilson, and this is what Terry Melcher kind of enunciates in the older documentary. He says, yeah, you can draw similarities. There's the wall of sound, and then Brian, obviously, with his layering of instruments. But Brian approached, Phil's production was all about, like, very angry, because he was angry.
Mhm.
He had a very rough childhood. He was smothered by his mother and sister when his father committed suicide.
Mhm.
He had a lot of issues, and I think a lot of his wall of sound came from a place of anger. And
Yeah.
obviously, we see how that materialized in his life, whereas Brian approached it with love. And
Mhm.
even, and I think when you frame it that way, instead of Mike Love, well, Brian was melancholy and I was the happy one. Yeah,
Yeah.
you've said that a lot, and I get it. He's not wrong all the time, but Brian was, he's a beautiful guy. And I don't like talking about him because it makes me emotional, because I think he's been, not, I mean, obviously he's done very well for himself, but
Yeah.
obviously
Oh,
mentally
yeah.
he's never been stable. And I think he's had a lot of people take advantage of him. Not, I don't think Mike Love was necessarily one of them, but he had his father, and then obviously Dr. Landy later on,
Mhm.
and luckily he was able to emerge from that, and hopefully now, you know, he's got people looking after him that have his best interest in mind. But I was hoping this would focus more on that. And again,
Mhm.
like a lot of things is coming into my brain.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
where
for
was
sure.
Van Dyke Parks? He's still alive.
He was well, he was in there a little bit. They had a little bit of
Archival
his
footage, but I
archival
like
footage,
I think
yeah.
it would have been nice to have that, like, or some of his other, maybe archival footage of some of his other, Brian's other writing partners, like Gary
Mhm,
Usher, Roger, or not Roger Corman, but what's his name? Unger, something like that. Anyway,
mhm.
you know, what did they have to say? And or sorry, Tony Asher and
I was gonna say
Gary
Tony
Unger.
Asher, yeah.
Gary Unger wrote a lot of, I think, the car songs with Brian, and then
Mhm.
Tony Asher obviously wrote Pet Sounds with him.
Yeah,
Where were they? I know they believe they both passed on. If I know Tony Asher has, if the other person has not, then I apologize
yeah.
for killing him. But it's yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm all over the place here, but it's I wanted to like this, and just so many things didn't do it for me.
Yeah, well, Mike Love, he's a controversial figure in the world of the Beach Boys because he does say a lot of times during the documentary, like, "Oh, you know, the songs that Brian and I wrote. You know, my cousin and Brian and I wrote these songs," and he's really taking a lot more credit than he probably should be. Although you can't deny, obviously, Mike Love's voice was a big part of the Beach
No,
Boys, and that you know that
absolutely.
bop bop bop, you know, like that scatty jazz, not really jazzy,
Yeah.
but
No, he
kind
was
of
the bass, right? I mean, you
it was the
needed that
bass, yeah,
bass.
yeah.
No, he was very important, and I think his skills as a musician are probably underrated. I think he's a very, very good singer. Like
Mhm.
when you think of the Beach Boys, a lot of people think of that voice, right? Even,
Yeah.
you know, even all the way into Pet Sounds, obviously it's a bit less on that record, but all the way
Mhm.
up to there, it's a lot of him, right?
Mhm.
Um, you know, whether or not, you know, he claims that a lot of his lyrical contributions were erased because of when Murray, so you know, didn't include him in the publishing or whatever,
Right.
selling off and all that stuff, and that's why he had to do the lawsuit. I don't know how much of that I buy, you know. And then
Mhm.
obviously, you know, we know that there's still like issues, like they're not best buds
No, they're
anymore. Like
not. Yeah.
they're not. Like Bruce and Mike is, because Bruce is Mike's puppet or puppy. Like they are, you know, the Trump supporting, you know, good old Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And then you've got Brian, who's, you know, obviously suffering from dementia now, but even before, you know, was more just
Mhm.
kind of on his own a lot.
Yeah.
And then Al is more on Brian's side, right? Like,
Mhm.
apart from that 50th anniversary tour, which I was, like you said, disappointed that they didn't get to that as well. You know, once that happened, it was another split. Whereas you had
Mhm.
Bruce and Mike, who basically, I think own the performing rights for the name, so they
Right.
can perform as the Beach
Those
Boys.
Beach
And then you
Boys,
had
yeah.
Al have his family band, and then also tour with Brian doing
Mhm.
some Pet Sound stuff, and I think maybe some Smile stuff at some point. But
They don't
maybe
get into
that might
that,
be
any of that,
incorrect.
like the touring,
Nothing.
like with Brian, like there is a long period, like he came back, like you saw him live,
Hmm.
like he came back, he did Pet Sounds live, he came back, he did Smile, he finished it,
He
he
finished
completed it,
Smile.
he finished Smile. I was listening to the to his version of it the other day. It's awesome, it's amazing. Well, you know, obviously
Yeah.
they released the Smile sessions later on where they released kind of
Well, they
the
did that
Beach
too.
Boys
Why not
version of it.
mention that?
Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
talk about how those records came out, like, and how Brian was, you know, obviously he's dealing with a lot of issues now, but there was a number of years where he was back out on the road, he was touring, he was entertaining audiences. He wasn't just
Yeah.
this guy that was lying in his bed for his entire life. And that's something I used to
No.
think when I was younger, when I was a kid, you know, I think about, I
Hmm.
mentioned that Bare Naked Lady song again. I used to think about Brian Wilson. I'm like, okay, well, he made Pet Sounds, he burnt out on Smile, and then he never did anything ever again. And then it was actually a little bit of a discovery for me when I started listening to more of their 70s material, that he wasn't necessarily the leader. Carl became the leader, but he was still there. He was still
Oh
writing,
yeah.
he was still recording. And then when he did get better later on, he was back out on the road singing songs for people. So yeah, they don't really get into that. It's just kind of like, and then he kind of lost it and now he's not doing too well. It's like there's like 30,
Yeah.
40 years of his life there that you're just glossing over.
Well, because they talk about Smile, and then the way I think they kind of leave it is like, well, or Mike basically and Bruce are kind of say like, oh, that wasn't us, you know, that wasn't really what we were about.
Mhm.
But it came out twice, his version, and then
Mhm.
they finally put out the Beach Boys version, and it was he was right. People loved it, and
Mhm.
they would have
Yeah.
loved it then as well.
Mhm.
And um, yeah, they kind of gloss over the fact that I mean, they eventually used those songs, you know, and then they focus on Smiley Smile, which is really strange, I thought, because
Yeah.
they were like, well, that was more us. I'm like, well, that was just
No.
a bad smile. Like that was
Well,
just like,
they get picked it up again on Wild Honey. Like they quickly
yeah,
recovered
which
from
they
that
didn't mention.
when they did Wild Honey, and well, they do like
They
they still have,
showed that they showed the cover
yeah, and
briefly, like,
and Darlin is in there, like, which
yes,
is a great kind of post Pet Sounds Beatles
yeah,
song. But yeah, there's so much material
Beach
there. They
Boys song.
gloss over the sorry, what did I say?
You said Beatles.
Oh, Beach Boy song. Sorry.
Sorry.
It's just
It's okay.
interchangeable, those B
Well,
band names, Beach Boy
yeah.
songs. But yeah, like, and then they don't really get into anything past that. There's so many great songs. The Friends album, like you were saying,
Mhm.
Sunflower, Surfs
2020.
Up, Love You, 2020. Maybe you skip 15 big ones. Maybe that's one
Yeah,
that we're not going to
obviously
talk
you
about.
can't, but I think hitting more of their story beats, like honestly, end it. End like if you had a part one and part two, you end part one. Okay, Smile. We, you know, Brian was not able to complete that. Now what?
Yeah.
And then here's part two. Like they're like the Beatles story also has these beats that you can follow the narrative. The
Hmm.
Beach Boys too, and that's a great one. What are we going to do?
Hmm.
We've hitched our wagon to Brian's idea of Smile. He can't complete it. It's too much for him mentally. Now what?
Hmm.
They do that, but that's a great way to end part one. And then part two is maybe them, you know, filling out their, you know, finding out what they need to do for those remaining Capitol albums. Or you take part one up to the end of the Capitol records at the end of 2020. And then when Capitol says thanks, but no thanks, and they move on and are able to kind of have at least a creative resurgence with Warner Brothers and their own imprint with Brother Records.
Hmm.
Obviously, was not a commercial success, and they mentioned that in Endless Harmony, and that's not a bad thing
Yeah.
to mention. Um, yeah, like did they mentioned Holland, right? Did they say,
They
you know, that
did.
they
Yeah.
recorded over there and all
Yeah,
that?
they did. They did
Yeah,
mention that they recorded in Holland. There wasn't a lot there. And that's generally how it is for the whole thing. Like with the not to bring it again back to the Beatles anthology, because not every band is going to have a 6 to 8 part uh series dedicated to everything that they've ever done. But the Beatles anthology, they dig into every album. Every album is kind of given. You can't do that with the Beach Boys because they have 30 plus albums or however many they
no,
have,
that's
but
fair.
they dig into each album and kind of explain why each album is a progression towards the next, and kind of this, like you're saying, stringing along this narrative that has these specific beats and moments that show you the course of the band. And they don't really do that on here, and it's just, it does feel a little bit left out, because I really want to know, you know, we're both musicians, we both
Well,
love
yeah,
this stuff. We want to hear, like, how did you make this? What was the reason for this song? What was the reason for this harmony? Like, we want to get into the nitty gritty of it, not just glossing over. They don't really get into any individual songs on
no,
the
not at
Beatles
all.
anthology. You get into specifics about these, all these important songs and their career. You know, it'd be nice to hear, why is God Only Knows so great? Why is Wouldn't It Be Nice so great? Why is it, they do, talk about In My Room and that kind of thing, but
Briefly,
just
yeah.
again, very, very surface level.
Well, yeah, and in Endless Harmony, they pause at one point. You know, they talk about "Kiss Me, Baby" from Beach Boys Today, and they show how he's there at the desk and showing how he built the harmonies, and they, you know,
Yeah.
they isolate the harmonies and they bring up the instruments and they show how that was done. I can't remember, like, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't even think, apart from one of the guitar players in the um, what is the name of the backing band?
The
It's
Wrecking
escaping
Crew.
me. Yeah, one of the guitar players, I believe, who's on this.
Mhm.
They touch very little on it. Like Hal Blaine, maybe
Mhm.
they have a little bit from him, I think, towards the
Yep, there is.
beginning.
Yep.
Was Carol Kay in this? I can't
Yeah,
remember. I
she
don't
was.
believe
Yep.
she was.
Yep.
But in Endless Harmony, they show her with her bass, showing how she like came up with the bass line for California Girls, for
Mhm.
Good Vibrations. Like they show some of that.
Right.
And I believe the clip, maybe I don't know if that was a contemporary clip or an older one. She is still alive. You know, she's not a young person anymore, but
Yeah.
I don't think she's like I think she has her faculties with her as far as I understand.
Mhm.
But you know, why wasn't there more from that? Like I just think that again, you're not giving people that are you're not giving anything new to the guys, to the fans that are, diehards or
Yeah.
been with following the band for 50, 60 years, and you're not showing new fans what this is all about. You're giving them what they probably have heard or understand
Yeah.
from popular culture in general, right?
Yeah.
I will say the
What's
beginning,
the audience? Who's the audience for
yeah,
this?
the beginning, I think they did a better job than Endless Harmony, mostly setting the table of where they grew up, influences and stuff like that. They had a bit more on the first session, which produced this record here, which I have. This is a
Oh,
copy
wow.
of their first single. This is actually what says it's an audition copy, so this is just
Oh,
for radio stations back then. So it probably
that's
came
awesome.
somewhere around California, but oh shit, no, sorry, I didn't drop it. But yeah, I think that they did well. But then I was
Mhm.
expecting, let's keep going with that. You're right. We maybe don't need what is it, 8-part documentary like the Beatles anthology, because there's probably not enough there. Although there could be, but at least a 4-hour thing, or even if you wanted to keep it to 2 hours or an hour and a half, like I watched a number, like I think this is 10, no, 12, 15 years ago, maybe now, the Rush documentary came out, and
Mhm.
it's about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, maybe 2 hours top. And I'm not like a diehard Rush fan, but it gets into it a lot better, and it covers their whole career up to that point. Obviously,
Mhm.
they were an active band up at that time, and that's a bit of a different thing.
Mhm.
But like you said, there's nothing I'm they must have a lot of footage that they shot around the recording of that. That's why God made the radio record for their 50th
Yeah.
anniversary. And then with the tour, that tour was a big deal.
Yeah,
That
it
was the
was.
first time that they had toured with a full-ish lineup, or the most full lineup possible in
Mhm.
decades. So why wasn't that, touched on? Even then,
Right.
if you turned off this movie and you didn't decide to go do any more research or reading, you wouldn't even know that happened unless you knew it happened. So
Yeah.
I didn't understand that. The way this movie ended, they put out Endless Summer in 1976, and maybe they showed a couple of the other compilations,
Yeah.
and then that was it. And
Yeah.
they don't like the deaths of Carl and Dennis are a footnote, which I
Mhm.
thought was disrespectful. Again, going back to Endless Harmony, and it's the only reference point I really have. They
Yeah.
did do there was a documentary made in the 80s. It was, I think that's where some of the Dennis Wilson interview footage comes from.
Mhm.
It's very like a late 70s, early 80s style production. Like, no, not that there was narration here, but just like interview, 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 interview. Like, it
Mhm.
doesn't tell a narrative, so it's not fantastic, but good footage. But anyway, in Endless Harmony, they take like a good amount of time, like probably like 5 minutes. It feels longer for each of them,
Mhm.
just focusing on this is what happened. And Carl had only died like that year that the film came out. So
Right.
like they obviously probably had to add that on pretty quickly. And it was they treated it in a very touching way with the guys speaking about it. And here it just felt like, Poochie died on his way back to his home planet kind of thing. And I
Yeah.
don't mean to be crass about it, but that's kind of how it came across.
Yeah.
Again, until you got to the end, you figured that they were dead because they weren't there in modern footage.
Yeah.
But they didn't, like that especially Dennis, that came while they were still not really an active band around that time, but they were still like, doing things, and they would do things after that. And Carl, at that time, they were definitely, involved with music. So I,
Mhm.
I yeah, that to me was mystifying.
Yeah.
Instead, you had, Mike Love with, I'm going to say, crocodile tears about, you know wanting to see Brian again. That
Well, then he sees him at the end. They go to the beach together.
I think that was, yeah, that scene. Like, yes, it was cute and fine. It's a nice way to end it.
Yeah.
But again, is Brian there on his own volition? Like, does he understand what's going on? I don't know. I'm not going to
Yeah.
comment one way or the other
Yeah.
because I don't know his situation. But if 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 that's even remotely the case, then I think that's wrong,
Mhm.
because and I would put that on Mike Love, if
Yeah.
to want to have that ending. I could see him wanting, just the way he talks and just knowing what I do know about him, I could see him wanting to have that happy ending, quote unquote, of them, returning to the
Right.
scene of their first record photo shoot and all that, and
Mhm.
showing, we're happy, but there was no like they just had like footage of them laughing. There was no like they didn't sit around
Yeah,
talking
there
like,
was no talking, yeah.
in the Beatles anthology when you've got Paul, George, and Ringo sitting around in contemporary time talking back and forth,
Mhm,
about things. And it's also like I don't think the Beatles anthology is like 100% warts and all,
mhm,
but there's some uncomfortable moments, I think, if you know what to look for in that modern
right.
sit down that they have. Like you can see Paul and George, you can still see how he treats him. So
Yeah.
like it's a bit, you have to dig a little bit, I think. But this, it was again like kind of putting a sheen on everything, even though at the beginning Carl's like, or a clip of Carl where he's like, "Yo, we've been through a lot." I'm like, "Okay," and then you
Alright,
get
here
to
we
the end,
go.
you're like, "What did you go through?" Like
What's the
it
dirt?
didn't
Yes.
seem like much, like yeah, like also in Endless Harmony they talk about Brian's issues with Dr. Landy. They talk about all of that and how they were, how they did help
Mhm,
um get him out of that. And Mike Love, I think, I'll give him credit for assisting on that a little bit.
mhm,
There's a funny scene in that where it's Carl or Brian's at the piano. It's like I guess probably shot in the mid '90s. Brian's at the piano, Carl's with him, and Al's with him, and he's doing playing California Girls, and he gets Al to hold his nose, and he starts
mhm.
singing in Mike Love's voice, and they're all like, but it's like that, like it's funny, and you could probably think Mike Love probably maybe he hated that, but at
Yeah,
least it was there. This I was like, just there wasn't any of
yeah,
that friction, and this brand is known for that.
yeah.
So I don't know.
There's a lot more to the story than what was presented here, and yeah, it's very much just a snapshot of what's going on with the Beach Boys and their career. And yeah, it's for us hardcore fans. Like a couple years ago during the pandemic, I went through and listened to every Beach Boys album in sequential order. I had never listened to every one of their records, and that
Mhm,
was a very epic listening experience because that was like again 25, at least 25 albums in there,
mhm.
studio records. They have quite a few, and then I went into the B sides and the unreleased stuff, and it was a great Beach Boys education because I know a lot of their stuff from the '60s, but never really gone into a lot of those '70s records. And there's a lot of great stuff there, and it's really disappointing that they did
Absolutely.
not include that in this documentary. But that's how it is, I guess. And again, with this one, including Kokomo just at the end there as a mere
Oh,
afterthought during the credits is a crime against humanity because it doesn't get any better than Kokomo.
well, I mean, I know that's kind of tongue in cheek, but again, like it's just
Great song.
what is that? Like if I'm 25 years old right now and maybe I've heard that. I don't know what kind of airplay Kokomo still gets. Obviously, when we were
We were
like when
kids,
that
yeah.
came out,
Yeah.
that was
It was
my
a big
favorite song
deal.
in the world. I didn't even
Yeah.
know who the Beach Boys were. I was like 5 years old or 6 years old. I remember my dad put it on a tape like that and Don't Worry Be Happy and La Bamba. Those are my
That's
favorite songs as a 5 6 year
that's a
old,
great
and he had a
late
tape
80s
made with
playlist.
those, and I just would listen to it over and over and over again. And that was like a big deal. They don't even touch on that or like show something from Full House. That's
I was gonna
funny.
say,
Like
where's
people
the
like
Full House
it
cameos?
draws it
Yeah.
into it. Like, and I know John Stamos is a bit of a, goofball, but I think he's an important part, like
Mhm.
um not musically, but I think just kind of bringing them into relevance again. Like they talk about how Capitol issuing "Endless Summer" brought them back
Mhm.
into relevance in the mid '70s. I think
Yeah.
again having them on Full House and having John Stamos there helped bring them into more relevance in the late '80s and early '90s. I don't know
Yeah.
that
100%.
you're going to have Kokomo on the Cocktail soundtrack without that or vice versa. I can't remember
Yeah,
which one came first, but
yeah,
yeah.
they go hand in hand for sure.
Yeah, and I don't want, yeah, I don't know. It was disappointing because again, also, you're not going to have this chance again to get them on
Right.
record. They're in their 80s.
Mhm.
They, Al, Bruce, and Mike still look good. They still seem to have their mental faculties with them, and that's
Mhm.
really amazing. I'm happy for that. But are you going to do this in another 10 years and get new
Yeah,
interviews
you're
from
not gonna be
them?
able
Most
to.
likely not.
Mhm.
So I think you kind of needed to make something a little more substantial, and maybe no, they probably won't. I was going to say maybe they can, but I think this is it. And yeah, it was the music is fantastic, and a lot of the footage that they showed and live footage and
Mhm.
stuff like that, it's always going to be good to see that again and hear those songs. But even the soundtrack, I don't know if you had to listen to to the soundtrack, it's very top level. There's some cool stuff on it, but there's not
Mhm.
they but even there's even some like big songs that they like leave off of that. And um I don't know, like do they even did Mike Love give his quote about like, well, we have these surfing songs for the people who live in California and like on the East Coast, and then we thought, for the middle of the country, Cars. Like I don't even think they went into the Cars songs that much,
Yeah.
which is a really important part of how their career kind of evolved. They're kind of silly songs when you think about it, but
Yeah.
that helped. That was part of the story, and I don't even know if that was really covered. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is what it is, and I'm glad we got something, but it could have been. I was hoping for better. So,
Same. And well, we might as well mention that you have met Brian Wilson before. You have a
ooh,
picture with Brian Wilson.
I do. I can't show
Can you
you that.
yeah, can you regale regale that story quickly
Yeah,
when you
so
met Brian Wilson?
I've seen him a few times. So the first time I saw him was at a casino, the River Rock Casino out in Richmond, BC. My family's from British or the Vancouver area originally, so I spent a lot of time there over the years, and I happened to be there one summer. I think it was 2007, and yeah, so he was playing there, and it's like a room of I don't know, maybe 500-600 people, maybe 1,000 if you're lucky. I
Mhm.
don't think so, but it's a very intimate room. He played all of his hits. It was with his the Wonderments band that did and some of his other musicians that played with him for a number of years. The band that did Pet Sounds, the band that did his version of Smile with him, and I think a lot of his main touring band in the
Right.
late 90s into the 2000s. But this was not touring anything. I think this was like not a one-off, but he was just doing, kind of greatest hits. But he went really deep. Like he played, I remember playing This Whole World, and it wasn't just like the main Beach Boys hit. So it was a great show. And then at the end of the show, they were doing a VIP meet and greet, which I guess you would pay and you'd get the meet and greet. And I'm like, well, I didn't pay, but I managed to find my way backstage because there was really no security, and I got into the meet and greet with my aunt like behind me, and I was like, "Please stay back," because
Yeah.
I was like 25, and you don't, or 24, you don't want to be seen with your middle-aged aunt at that time, especially. Actually, she was talking to I think his bass player, and I was waiting, and she said to him, "Oh, Ryan's a baser too," and I'm like, "Please stop,
Baser.
please stop talking. Here, this is not good." Anyway, so I managed to finagle my way back there and got in the line, and yeah, got my picture taken. I should have grabbed it off the wall, but I've got my signed copy of All Summer Long that he said signed to Ryan. And
Yeah.
then as I was kind of speaking with him and wrapping up, you could kind of see some people in the background talking, like, I don't think this kid's supposed to be here. And
Yeah.
so eventually it was clued in that I was not supposed to be there, but
How do
I
they know? How
left.
do they even know?
I think because I didn't have some kind of wristband or some kind of ticket that you had to give to the handler or something like that. But he was really nice. I didn't know what to say. I don't really remember what I said. I think I said something along the lines of you know, I you know, you, your music has like, been meant so much to me, something like that. Nothing
Yeah.
cool, because what do you say in that situation?
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, he signed the record, and yeah, I have a picture. I would show you, but I look terrible, and I actually can't. I tried to find it, but I don't
That's
remember
okay.
where the copy is. But
That's all right.
but um, but yeah, it was great to meet him, and
Mhm.
and then I saw him again at Massey Hall. I don't. Did No,
I
that
don't think
was
I
that
no, I
was.
didn't.
I know I
Yeah,
didn't go
we
there
saw
with you.
Levon in Massey
And
Hall. We
then
saw. Yeah.
we saw that, yeah. And then we went to the Beach Boys reunion show at the amphitheater,
I didn't go to
right?
that one. I know I missed that one.
I thought you were there.
Maybe, yeah, maybe our friend Mike went with. Did Mike go to that
Mike,
one?
that's right. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's right. Yes, I saw it. I thought it was all of us. Um, but that was really amazing too. And I think those are the only times I've seen him.
Yeah.
And I never went to see the Mike Love Beach Boys or anything like
Nah.
that, just because it's not really that interesting. But that reunion show, was really good with David Marks. It was nice to have him there. But yeah, that's my Brian Wilson meeting story. So
Yeah,
that's
that's
my
pretty awesome.
only one. That's one of two famous musicians I've met.
Yes,
So
we'll tell we have to tell the Paul McCartney story another time.
another time, yeah.
Yeah, but meeting
Everyone his
famous bass
anthology. Yeah.
players, yeah, anybody
Yeah.
involved, meeting some of the key players in the Beatles and the Beach Boys. Okay, so if you're
Yeah.
gonna give this movie a score out of 5, what would be your score for the Beach Boys documentary from Disney Plus?
I would say a two,
A
unfortunately.
2
I'm
out of
gonna have
5.
to, yeah, so that's a failing grade. Yeah, for me, I can't go over that. Just there's too many, leaving out basically half of their career is enough for me not to give it that mark. Yeah.
Yeah,
What about you?
I'll go with a 2 out of 5 as well. It just
Okay.
didn't hit the mark for me. It just felt very just very surface level. Didn't do enough
Yeah.
to invest me in the story. The thing is that both of us know more to the story, so like that's in the back of our heads when we're watching this, so we can fill in that information supplementally in our heads, so we know the whole story. But I feel like if you're, again, you were saying somebody, if you're a young kid or somebody who's just getting into the Beach Boys and you want to discover more about them and learn more about their history, this
Hmm.
probably isn't the place to do it. You could probably have a better time just reading Wikipedia or something. But this is good. And then obviously, if you can find Endless Harmony somewhere, I don't even know where you'd be able to find that other than just like a old
There's
VHS or
YouTube
DVD.
rips. There's yeah, I
YouTube.
have the DVD, but there's a few YouTube rips out there. If
Yeah.
I recommend it, it's really good. You can find their '80s documentary as well out
Mhm.
there. I think as a YouTube rip or
Yeah.
somewhere. Then none of these are well protected, but and then also there's the I don't remember if you ever saw the made for TV movie that they
I
did back
did.
in the
Yes.
'90s,
Yeah,
which
I
was
did.
more focused on like their relationship with Murray, I
Mhm.
think, rather than and how that kind of impacted the career. And they do
Yeah.
touch on that. I
A
believe
lot.
they
Yeah.
touched on that. Yeah, but but um, but yeah, that's more like that. And I think it's along the lines of those '90s made for TV doc or biopics that were never that don't age too well. I think the
Mhm.
Temptations one is is in
Yeah.
that kind of category as well.
Yeah.
But that was I remember that was the first time I'd ever heard that part of the story about them, about how their dad was so abusive for them with them
Yeah.
growing up, and then how he treated them like garbage. While he was their manager, just because, yeah, he was just jealous. I think it pretty much
Yeah,
comes through.
exactly.
And
His
then
kids ended up
I like
outshining
that they
him.
did play some of that dialogue of him in the studio, like just
Mhm.
berating Brian and berating them, and yeah, I think he just was a bitter man.
Yeah, his kids outshone him, and he was yeah, he
Hmm.
was a very bitter guy, and he ended up selling the rights to their songs and all sorts of stuff. So it's an interesting story. There's not a lot
Hmm.
there for people like us who are kind of hardcore, not hardcore Beach Boys fans, but pretty big Beach Boys fans. And I guess if you're somebody just looking for a little surface level coverage of their entire story, then this would probably be the place for it. So we're gonna give it a 2 out of 5 on this edition of Rock Movie Review. And I want to thank my good friend and special guest, Ryan Charkow, for coming here on the show today. Ryan, that was a lot of fun. And we'll have to do this again and chat about something else. Maybe, we got Oasis definitely maybe coming up because,
Hmm.
you love your classic rock, but
Anniversaries.
you're also a big, Brit rock fan like I am.
Yeah.
I actually did I recently did a best albums of 2004
Yes, I saw
video here on
that.
the channel. I gave you several shout outs in that video because so many of those records that I listened to were because we used to listen to them in your car when we were driving around London when we were in university.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I saw your Instagram, the Instagram version of it, so I'll have to
yeah,
check out the full version. It did make me feel very old that those
yes,
records are 20 years now, but
yeah.
that's life.
But here we are, 20 years later, and we're
Yeah,
still
here we
talking
are,
about
still
music.
alive.
So there you
Yeah,
go. We're still going. So
absolutely.
awesome, Ryan. Thanks for coming on the channel today.
All right, thanks, Nick.